Pony show here. Today's topic is how we administer our floodplain ordinances for fill, and it's our third part. And this one has more case studies in it. And so here you can see Big John, or whatever this guy is, doing some major earth moving. I wonder how many of our mountaintop removal sites have been through the floodplain permitting process. So once again, this presentation is sponsored by the West Virginia Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Management, but they haven't reviewed or approved what I'm showing you this afternoon. I put this together on my own. I'm an engineer, but not a lawyer. So this is the best advice I can offer based on what we know now. This has been a particularly difficult session to put together because we have very few fill permits, applications, and so forth that I've found that are complete. And so on the one hand, it's more needed than ever, and on the other hand, it's been difficult to put together because I couldn't find very many examples. And so I would like for you to let me know if you have an example with a complete file now, or if you have something coming up in the next 3 months or so, or even 6 months, that you think would make an interesting case history or a case study, and we'll put that together in a future webinar. This is the 5th of 6 webinars in this series, and it's number 11 in the total that have been funded by the state. We have one more, and then we'll be asking for funding once again. Richard Cart will be asking for funding from the state. So if you enjoy these, if you learn from these, if you think they're beneficial, please send Richard a note of encouragement and let him know that you think this is worthwhile doing. If you don't think it's worthwhile doing, I suppose you got to tell him that too. But if you've been on the call for very many times and keep coming, you probably like it. So we're going to explore 3 or maybe 4 real case histories where fill has been an issue, or it's an issue right today. And as we go through this, I'm going to ask you what you think ought to be done by the community floodplain manager. And as we've done before, there's no right or wrong answers, or there's no grading, at least, of your answers. This is for us to kind of build an understanding and experience and together, and also hopefully help us learn how we can network together so that we can kind of share the burden and share the wisdom here as we go through these kinds of issues individually in the future. So the 3 case studies we're going to be looking at are in Barboursville. There's a private development underway, very interesting. There's a private development that's been completed in White Sulphur Springs, and this one I had trouble getting information from the files on. And then finally, one that's a public school that Kevin saved the day on in McDowell County. And if there's time, I have another one yet that is in Lincoln and Kanawha County. So here's our first site in Barboursville, and we're kind of getting oriented here. You can see that the site is on the Wyandotte River, which flows into the Ohio River. You can see that it's in Cabell County, and it's, as you'll see in a moment, it's on the border. The project is on the border between the village of Barboursville and the county of Cabell County. So diving in deeper here, you can see where the site is once again, and see how the plumbing works in terms of the Wyandotte connecting to the Ohio River. So this is a backwater situation where the base flood elevation is determined by the water height on the Ohio River, which makes for an interesting question later that we'll talk about when it comes to floodway. So this is south of I-64, just south of Route 60, in an area that's under development. And I got to tell you, in Barboursville, there's some really nice houses and so forth going in. It looks like a really nice city, emerging city. So here we are looking at more detail at the site. You can see outlined in blue the Guyandotte, and on the north side here of our image, Riverview Drive, and Peyton Street going north and south, and the white dotted line that's in the middle of Guyandotte is the division between Cabell County to the left, which is managed by Tim Keaton for floodplain purposes, and by the village of Barboursville on the right, which is managed by Dan Porter. Dan's a professional engineer and also a professional surveyor, so he's the right kind of guy to have working on this, and has kind of inherited a legacy of some tricky kinds of things to work through. So we're going to be looking here at, specifically at these 4 arrowheads and some other areas as well. So let's take a closer look now. And you can see I've added a few arrowheads, and it's a different aerial photo. It's a more recent aerial photo. And so at the top end, and let me use my highlighter here, this structure is in the floodway and entirely in the floodplain. The border of the floodway is here. And so this structure is in the floodway. And this is a new structure at the downstream end, and it looks like someone knew that this was the edge of the floodway, although I don't have any data of that other than the coincidence of the edge of the building, or the majority of the building, being on the edge of the floodway. Now, what's kind of curious, though, is that it's got these stairwells or something on the end, and we'll see this in another view, and also a series of garages here that project into the floodway. So looking at this further, this is the complex that's being built. I believe these are sold. Some of these are sold, and they're luxurious condominiums. And I was told when I visited the site that the one nearest to us here was sold for $400,000 as a condo. Nice to see that we have those kinds of property values in West Virginia. Construction is still underway. This is a nearby, I suppose it's a community recreation center for the facility, and it's in the middle of a kind of the traffic circle that you can see here. To the left of the word Dan Porter, you can see kind of a semicircle. That's the community center's in the middle of that. So it's going to be good living. Here's a photo I took of the back of the facility, and then I've put in red the edge of the floodway in the upper picture, and in the lower inset you can see where I drew the line, the red line. So the heavy red line is this in the same location in the lower inset and on the upper photo taken while standing. And the structure that says floodway on it, that the label floodway is on top of, is a series of garages for the occupants of the building. Here's the official flood insurance rate map, and from this it's pretty hard to tell what is where. You can see the cross sections. That's interesting. You can see the zone X. You can see that we have base flood elevations that are 554 everywhere. I mean, here's one here, here's one here, here's one here, here's one here, here's one even back further. So that's all backwater from the Ohio River. which is what's establishing the base flood elevation here. So if we look at this with the Bing background on the West Virginia flood tool, you can see again our 554 cross sections, base flood elevation lines, and we can see where the building sits and where the floodway is, and we can see that cross section again. So the point with this is that these two maps are in basically the same orientation, the closest that I could make them be. And the official firm is much harder to read and make sense of than the West Virginia flood tool. So hats off to the GIS Tech Center for this tool, which is so invaluable. And Julie, you from Pennsylvania is asking if we'll be sending CFM credit to ASFPM on this presentation. And what will happen is I'll send each of you a certificate. That is, if you pay attention through the course and respond to the questions I ask. And so I'll send you a certificate. I don't tell ASFPM myself who attended, but you can keep track of that for yourself and put it on your annual CFM form. But I can tell if you're paying attention, so don't be drifting off. Here's the same area, showing it with the streets, and you can see a little bit better where the cross sections are. So starting from the right, we have cross sections AR, then AS, then AT, then AU, and this is going to be important for us to note later. So we have 4 cross sections to work with here and to be thinking about. So here's the history. This is a little bit of a just a list or a timeline. So the community first had its flood map issued in 1975, and in around 1999 the area we've been looking at was filled. And then in 2010 the property was sold to the current developer, the owner of the condominiums, and the prior owner had said, don't worry, all the land that's in here that's buildable is not in the floodplain. And the developer then undertook the project believing that information. So then when I looked at the aerial photography, I could tell that between 2003 and 2009, these upper buildings here, the one with the white roof and the one with the green roof and the one with the red roof were constructed. Going back now to our slide. And then the condominium construction began after 2011, relatively recently. So the developer in 2013, this year, sold a condo, and the purchaser came back to him and said, you know, I got to get flood insurance. And the developer said, well, this is new to me. I wasn't aware. I had no idea. I'll pay you some premiums until we get this sorted out. So then the property owner, the developer, hired an engineer from Huntington to do a HEC 2 study. Actually, the first study was a HEC 2, the one done many years ago, and I learned just this afternoon that the engineer is using HEC RAS. To study, to figure out what the rise is from this fill in the floodplain. And well, we'll come to in a moment here to what we're gonna have to do with this property. So the engineer, through the owner and the county, submitted a letter of map amendment, or a letter of map revision fill, and FEMA found data that it was seeking in addition to what was submitted. So let's look at the floodway data here. Here's the floodway data table from the Guyandotte River, the rivers that we're on. And remember, we're on sections what? AR through AU. Okay, the top 4 ones at the top. Now, it was a puzzle to me, and I wonder if you can sort out why this is the regulatory floodway. The base flood elevation is 554, but the base flood elevation considering the floodway is 549. So send me an answer to what you think. And while you're doing that, Alma has asked a question: has construction stopped on the property until resolved? And to my knowledge, it has not. And that might be what we would want to recommend to Danny as a committee here. So I'm asking you to tell me in the chat box why these numbers are so different. And the answer is kind of in the fine print down here. Elevation considered without backwater effects of the Ohio River. So when I looked in detail in the flood insurance study, it said that the limits of the floodway were determined without consideration for backwater. So it was as if, from the Ohio River, so it was as if the Guyandotte was discharging into a normal stage in the Ohio River rather than an elevated stage of the Ohio River. And this makes sense to me because the Ohio River is such a large watershed, and the timing of a storm and the flow that would arrive at this point would be dramatically different for the Guyandotte. The Guyandotte's going to rise and fall quickly compared to the Ohio, and also the watersheds are different. It could get rain in one area and not in another. So that's the reason that these numbers are separate. And I'm asking questions. I had to kind of sort it out. You'll understand more if you have to think about it and answer it. I hope you don't take it that I'm trying to be cute or trap you or whatever. This is all a learning exercise, and I want you to struggle with it as I had to struggle a little bit as well. So if you find that you get irritated with these kinds of things, let me know. But it also helps you pay attention. So here's our increase, and I highlighted here that the elevation in the without floodway is because the backwater wasn't considered. And here's the text from the flood insurance study. This large text in the bottom that begins, near the mouths of streams studied in detail. Da, 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 da. Here's the reach on the current flood insurance study profile shown in red. And you can see here it's showing also the 1% annual chance for from backwater from the Ohio River. And so that backwater is going to go all the way to the right tip of that arrow over here, which is section BF, or 11 miles above the confluence with the Ohio River. Let me get rid of this bar on the bottom so you can see the bottom. Oops. Yeah. So the backwater has a significant impact. So I'm going to ask a couple questions. What is the best course of action for the property owner? If you were advising the builder, what would you tell him to do? Please let me know in the question box. So here he's bought this property that somebody else filled. He thought it was okay. He wants to do the right thing. Interestingly, I understand that there's an agreement between the guy that said, oh, don't worry, it's not in the floodplain, and the current owner, where the first guy, the guy that sold him this pig in a poke said, well, I'll cover the cost. Let me know what, just let me know what it's going to cost to kind of get this fixed. So what we have so far is that in terms of responses, are sue, stop construction, get an elevation certificate, don't know, have a cease and desist order until resolution from the HECRAS study is complete. Somebody else says file a lawsuit, do a letter of map amendment with current elevation data, Tim Farley says. Raise the buildings, meaning R-A-I-S-E, not raise like demolish. Frank Wilson says get an engineering flood shot before buying, never trust anybody's word. And others are saying work with a floodplain manager and figure out what to do here and get a flood study done. And I think those are all potential tasks for him. Now the next question is, what should the floodplain administrator do? And so, and back to the old question, Terry Huff says, do a LOMA C, and if FEMA denies, then determine alternatives to install flood-proof solutions. So what would you tell Dan Porter, or what would you do if you were Dan Porter? By the way, I've reviewed these slides with Dan. I don't think he's able to attend this afternoon. I've also reviewed them with the engineer that's representing the owner, and talked a little bit with Tim Keaton about it. The best advice here so far is call Richard Cart and ask him what he would do. But anyway, Danny Porter's on. Okay, good. So, sorry, Danny, I didn't see you in the attendance list. So the advice I'm seeing here is stand your ground, do not waver from the ordinance that is in effect. Another is tell them to get an elevation certificate and file a LOMA. The administrator should require a flood study reflecting the changes and then ensure the building meets the regulations in place. Another one says stop work, get an attorney. Tina says start with an elevation certificate, do a low MAC, which maybe Tina means something else. I don't know. LOMA, I don't know, L-O-M-A-C. Tina, is that what you meant? Sounds good to me. Somebody else says require some type of flood wall. And Terry says a stop and desist order should be issued to ensure that additional construction, that no additional construction is performed to decrease any additional risk. Well, I'm going to stick my neck out here and tell you what I would do, and that would be to, and I've had some time to think about this, and also talk with a floodplain administrator and so forth. But one of the issues in the study is that the cross sections done by the engineer don't intersect cross sections that were in the original flood study. The extent is less. So FEMA wants the area of analysis expanded. I'd suggest evaluating the impact of this existing fill on the base flood and floodway compared to the 1975 condition when the flood insurance maps first came out. And because we're in a backwater situation, I would think that the base flood elevation is not going to change. The BFE is controlled by the Ohio River, not by what happens on the Guyandotte. When we look at the floodway, we can see that the floodway is wider than it needs to be, and we probably can shrink in the floodway. And so going through a letter of map revision, shrink the floodway, which is the third bullet. And if that works out, then prepare a letter of map revision, which I had originally written as a conditional letter of map revision. I'm not sure which is proper. I think right now it should be Lomer, requesting FEMA to accept narrowing the floodway and to have this be remapped, reflecting the presence of fill. Now, part of the tricky part of this is that we've got to obtain sign-off from the proposed change from neighboring property owners and the neighboring community, which is Tim Keaton. And Tim has kind of dug in his heels on this and said, I don't want to sign off on this because I don't want to increase the base flood elevation on people in Cabell County. So there's some convincing that needs to be done here with Tim that after we demonstrate that it's actually true with the modeling and so forth, to show that, well, unfortunately the fill's already been placed, and the only way we can let this go that I know of is with a Lomer F and or some kind of mitigation. And Tim, we want you to sign the form because it doesn't have any impact on your community. And then get the letter of map revision for fill submitted and approved. And finally, Danny Porter, who spent a lot of time on all this, is entitled to bill the developer for the time and energy that's spent on this problem. And as I mentioned before, the developer, through some agreement, can pass this expense back to the prior landowner, the one that that indicated that there's no floodplain problem here. So Tina Oldfield has kind of clarified what she meant was a conditional letter of map amendment, or a CLOMA, or CLOMA. Let's see what other comments we have here. We've covered the bases, I think, with the comments. So let me go back here, unless I'm out of sequence. Yeah, I am. Okay. So time for a vote, and that is, well, what of all these submittals, conditional letter of map amendment, conditional letter of map amendment fill, letter of map amendment, or letter of a map amendment fill, which do you think is the most appropriate form to submit to FEMA? And I don't know the answer, and I would want to talk with John Janowitz or somebody in Region 3 to find out. If somebody has some ideas on who else to ask, let me know. Let everybody know. Most folks are saying Loma F. One is being honest and saying, I don't know. But the consensus seems to be the conditional letter of map amendment fill. Well, let's move on to another location now. You can keep on giving answers to that last question if you like. So where the heck are we here? Any good West Virginian that likes to gamble should know where this is. So let me know in the chat box where this is. And Jay Holland gives us a hint. He writes WSS. So Terry, that's a hint for you. Terry can't figure it out. And it's the Greenbrier. And so this is what's that guy's name? That's the coal magnate's place. So remember that underneath this area here, he's put an underground casino. Jim Justice, yeah, that's his name. So, and I think the bunker is over in here somewhere. I don't know. I've been to the bunker a couple times. It's pretty interesting. So I've had lunch at the Greenbrier, but I've never stayed there. I need to convince my wife to take me there for my birthday or something. So let's get oriented here. So I'm going to get my red bouncing ball out. And so over here on the right is the Greenbrier. And if you can't, we have a comment that I'm not even rich enough to even pay for a visit to the Greenbrier. Well, Terry, maybe you don't even have enough money then to even look at it in an aerial photo. I don't know. So anyway, can you see the red ball on the right-hand side over here? That's the Greenbrier Hotel. And you can see the plethora of golf courses that are part of the complex. And the area that we're going to be talking about is in yellow here. It's called the Sportsman's Club. And for those of you who were at the Greenbrier a long time ago, I'm drawing in now in yellow where the runway was for the White Silver Springs Airport. That airport's gone now, and there's another airport up in Lewisburg. So that's our general orientation. Here's the flood insurance rate map. And again, I'm trying to make a point here about how difficult these darn things are to read. This is aerial photography, I believe, from 2003. You can see the map number and so forth that's on the lower right corner here, and and also the key. And so part of what I want you to tell me is in the area that's the special flood hazard area, how much of it is floodway? Can you tell the difference between floodplain and floodway? And if you had to say it was 50% or 60% or 70% or 80% or 90%, what would you say for what you see in this? How much of this is of the special flood hazard area is designated as floodway? I had a heck of a time with the key trying to figure all this out myself. And the difference, I just seen it now, is that the floodway has diagonal white lines going from upper right to lower left. And when it's on top of the white background from the black and white photo, it's really hard to see. And the answer is, yeah, 80%, 90%, something like that. It's really high. It also looks pretty crazy to me, kind of like mold on a piece of bread or something. It's just all over the place. It doesn't look like a well-defined stream. Here's another view, and it's got the base flood elevations and cross sections on it. Let's take another look here. Here it is on top of an aerial photo where it's a little bit easier to see. Excuse me. And so you can see that we've got these lines of constant head drawn across. I'm going to draw a line across 1792 here, through here. Here's another one over here, 1782. So they're supposed to be perpendicular to the direction of flow. And in terms of flow lines, let me change my color here. And get a pen out. And we've got a flow line through here. It's hard to see when it's red, I know. A flow line through here. Maybe some flow here. It doesn't look like an efficient sort of stream, and it looks to me also like the floodway is much bigger than it needs to be. Here it is on top of a more easily read figure. And so you can see the floodway is shown to be most of the special flood hazard area. And you can see also that we have cross-section B in the middle. It's blue. We're going to talk about that in a moment. This is from the flood tool, and it's a lot easier to see in the flood tool than it is on flood insurance rate map. So let's look at some particular houses here. So here's a McMansion in that area, and you can see it's got a circular driveway coming up to the front and some landscaping and a vacant lot beside it and a golf cart concrete route up there in the upper side of the photo. Now, is this in or out of the floodway? And I would caution anyone looking at this to say that the aerial photography in a process called orthorectification, it could catch the roof or put the roof in the wrong place. And it may be that because of the perspective of where the plane was flying. If this plane flew from the southern side of the page here, then it would project the roof out further than it actually is if we were there with surveying equipment. So this one may or may not be in. I know we use and I'd want to look at it, but the idea of when in doubt, it's not out. Here's some more kind of craziness with this little V shape down in the lower right, and these houses have been positioned. I believe the stream on the bottom is Howard Creek. That's the stream that we're talking about. It's also interesting in this aerial photo to look at the trees on the left-hand side. Some of them have leaves and some of them don't. So these aerial photos have been pieced together from different periods of time. Now this guy, I don't think there's much question that this guy is in the floodway. Now, is he really causing an increase in the base flood elevation? I don't know, but it's kind of a question just like what we saw in Barbersville about it doesn't follow the ordinance. And he should be doing, the developer, before this was built, should have had a conditional letter of NAP revision and then followed by a LOMAR to put this house in, if indeed it did not have any effect on the base flood elevation. But clearly it's in the floodway. Answers from some on these questions I've been asking is that for the first house that needs a survey, another respondent says he thinks it's in. Another respondent says it's probably out. Folks are asking, has the stream been relocated? And I think it probably has. The most pertinent phrase, though, is the laws do not apply to the rich, which is probably one of those painful truths. And finally, Robin, our official spokesman for FEMA, says that any time that we're in the floodway for new development, they need to get a HACRAS study and show there's no adverse effect. And I think that's the book answer. So there's another issue in here that was brought to my attention by Melissa Scott. And see if you can sort out from this image what that additional issue is. It depends on, I don't know if it's a violation of their ordinance or not. And I'm going to look at the model ordinance while I'm waiting for your answers here to see if the model ordinance has in it the issue that's shown here. It has to do with site planning. And Melissa Sargent is on the right track. Others are saying they don't know. Hats off to Melissa, and I didn't catch it myself. And that the answer is that there's no egress for these structures because the roads are flooded. So if we lived anywhere in here, we'd have to cross here, 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 and then this major area here to be able to get out. So we can't get in or get out. And emergency vehicles can't get in or get out. And in my quick look at the model ordinance, I'm not seeing language that requires roads to be above the base flood elevation. But I know that in some jurisdictions they have that. But then there's been a suggestion that because they're rich, they have helicopters and they can get in and out that way, which I'm not that rich, so I don't know, and Terry's not that rich, so she doesn't know. But Damien is that rich, so he knows. So here's the report from the website of the engineering group that, and it says that they've submitted documentation saying that they've requested a letter of map revision. And now I went to the FEMA website and I didn't find it. By the way, this is on the map at the Map Service Center, and so if there's a letter of map change since the last issuance of a map, then it should show here's a plus sign, and then you click on the plus sign and then you can download a PDF of the document. Now, Melissa and I were thinking that we're not going to see that letter of map change here because the project was done 10 years ago and the map has been changed since then. So the maps incorporate those revisions in the updated map. But it would be good to see the letter of map revision documentation. So I asked Greenbrier County and White Sulphur Springs to provide me with the information from their files, and for this presentation, and over the course of several days, with people being busy and needing to be out for personal leave and so forth, they were unable to find it. But they did send me some other letters of map change, and from that I kind of get the idea that 10 years after an event like this, it's really hard to reconstruct what's happened. And so my advice would be have a filing system that puts this stuff together by parcel or something. Don't depend on FEMA's records, and don't have just all your letters of map change in one folder or something like that, because later you're going to have to figure out which letter of map change went with which parcel and which property. And it takes a lot of detective work. Even better yet, get it all in an ArcView project so that it's geographically referenced for yourself. So here's another stumbling block I had. Once again, kind of not a trick question, but a stumbling block for me. And I got it sorted out, but it took me a little while. And so what do you think's happening here? We've got this. These are both for Howard Creek, and you can see here for Section A, we've got a regulatory base flood elevation of 1693 in the current FS, and then here's Howard Creek's cross-section A again, and we've got a regulatory height of 1840. There's a difference of 150 feet. What's going on? One suggestion is it's mountaintop removal, which since it's not Mingo County, Jay is kind of catching on here. Jay says different locations. First is a 2,900 feet upstream, while the second is 38,000 feet upstream. And another suggestion is a different datum, but the datums are only different by 0.6 of a foot. What happened is that the area was annexed by the city of White Sulphur Springs. And so the bottom FS is White Sulphur Springs, FS, Flood Insurance Study, with A starting at the intersection of the boundary between Greenbrier County and White Sulphur Springs, the community. Then they annexed, White Sulphur Springs annexed a lot of the county, and so cross-section A was then relabeled much further downstream because the aerial extent of the community changed, and that took me a while to kind of sort that out. You can also see here that the increase in cross-section G, and that's the one that we looked at before, is only 0.3 of a foot, and H and I, or H, excuse me, is a 0, which leads me to believe that probably the area of the floodway could have been made smaller. Which I would think the developer would want. I mean, after all, this is a golf course that we have this floodway on top of, and when Arnold Palmer gets a new idea for how to make this course difficult, they're going to want to go in and regrade that thing. And so they want to have that as much as they can out of the floodway, as well as keeping structures out of the floodway as well. So I think they could have cut this closer in terms of minimizing the area of the floodway. So here you can see the same cross-section information with the same data on the right. We'll look at some flood maps here, I think, in a moment, or perhaps. So the base flood did not change. It's a matter of you got to have the right cross-section with a right flood insurance study. They're paired, and they shifted. The cross-section locations shifted between the two flood insurance studies, the one from 1992 and the one from 2012. Here we can see a cross-section G again. And now, so I've gone in and looked at the profiles of the flood insurance study, and it seems remarkable to me that the developer was able to show that with all this development in this area, making these house pads and all that, that there would be no increase in the base flood elevation. I'm going to go back to the previous slide. Look at the extent of that special flood hazard area and the floodway. It goes all the way from the south side of the creek all the way up to Route 60. The entire area is shown to be in the floodplain. Now the floodway is about the same amount of total area, but it's all consolidated rather than spread out, like was shown in the current, or is shown in the current flood insurance rate map. So I've gone in and drawn on this guide, this 1992 flood insurance study, in the PowerPoint, the 100-year profile. And then I copied it in its exact shape and moved it to the 2012. So the red line on here represents the prior study's profile. And there's no place that the 100-year new one is higher than the old one. So they've done a good job at not exceeding. So they did not raise the base flood elevation. I thought sure they had. And one of the things that's hard here is it's easy to look at the 1 in 500 year line rather than the 1 in 100 year line, because the 1 in 500 year line is the highest one. And so it helped to go through and paint it red. Make sense? Well, this adjoins the area. This is a separate issue, but in the investigation of this and also in looking some of the clomars, I found some clomars over in this area to the west of where we are. This is to the west of the subdivision in the area that's white in the aerial photo. That's a 2003 aerial photo. That's the area that was then developed into the golf course. So cross-section 1791, or the base flood elevation line at 1791, is on where the golf course is now. The structure that would be on the cross-section 1776, or the BFE line 1776, is undoubtedly a wastewater treatment plant. And so let's take a look at that wastewater treatment plant in the current aerial photo. And ow! The community has built part of its wastewater treatment plant in the floodway. So we've got a problem here. And what do you do with that? What do you do with that as the community official? And I would say, well, we ought to try to reduce the area of the floodway on the golf course and in this area as well. Have you lost audio? I have an indication that you can't hear me. Is that the case? Okay, people can hear me, so that's good. Thanks. So one person comments to say, well, if the structure walls are above the BFE, it's not a problem. And that's maybe true for a wastewater treatment plant facility that's in the flood plain if we certified that it's flood proofed. Well, first we've got to decide too, well, is this a structure? Is a wastewater treatment tank a structure? And what do you think? I hadn't thought about that question before. Does that meet the definition of a structure? And do we need an elevation certificate on a wastewater treatment tank? Send me a response in the chat box. Now the question's a little bit moot because I think that this is a building. I haven't seen it on the ground, but that sure looks like a building anyway. But I think it's still an issue that it's in the floodway and it's an obstruction to flow, whether or not you have to have an elevation certificate or whether or not it's considered a structure. It's still development in the floodplain, floodway. And Danny Porter says the elevation certificate is required by the state health department for those wastewater treatment tanks as well. So I think we've had another oops here, and it's been a recent one. I mean, between the years 2003 and 2011. So we've got a lot of homework to do here to get, and a lot of spade work, a lot of missionary work to get the message out and get the facilities that are built from now on in compliance. So I've got some emails that I've gotten from Kevin Sneed that are legacy emails from Robert Perry, and they're for this project. So hats off to Robert and hats off to Kevin for being able to find out stuff about this project at the Greenbrier. And so you don't have to read this thing. I mean, if we looked at how complex this statement is, we'd say, well, it must have been written by a lawyer and only a lawyer can understand it. So Robert Perry went through and did a translation in his email. So this is what FEMA wrote, and then this is what Robert translated to me, which is the developers should work with communities to ensure that all the necessary documentation is in the possession of both communities, and on and on. So Robert has taken this complex language and rephrased it. I don't think there's anything lost in the translation into, well, here's what you need to do here. Here's another one. Here's what FEMA wrote. So they're using words like annotated and reasonable accuracy and substantiate and so on, which are pretty sophisticated terms. Here's Robert's. He got it boiled down to 2 sentences in a note. Once again, hats off to Robert. And there's a comment, God bless Robert. And we miss him for his advice. I mean, we're glad to have Richard and Robin and Greg and Kevin. And they were taught by the master. And I'm glad that Robert is up where he can really make even a greater difference at EMI. So in that